Hello, and welcome to The New Normal, a series of virtual discussions intended to help us get out of our comfort zones and debate different perspectives of the future. My name is Todd Terrazas, and I'm your host. On this episode, we have Neil Sahota giving a talk on preventing the next epidemic, let alone pandemic. Neil Sahota is a United Nations Artificial Intelligence Advisor, an IBM Master Inventor, co-host of a Changing the Story podcast, a professor at UC Irvine, and author of the book Own the AI Revolution. He's a sought-after speaker and business consultant to help enterprises define the future by creating it themselves. Following this talk, we will go into breakout rooms for 20 minutes. Afterwards, we will return to this main room for an open discussion. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can join us in Zoom by visiting thenewnormalseries.com. Now, without further ado, here's Neil Sahota.
Hey, thanks, Todd. Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. It's my pleasure to be talking about the new normal and how we can use artificial intelligence to prevent the next epidemic, let alone pandemic. Now, I do get asked quite a lot about artificial intelligence and COVID-19, particularly, are we using it to find like a vaccine? The answer, unfortunately, is sort of. We have a lot of tools we're using in terms of collaboration and connecting people. There's a little bit going on to try and help on the research side, but the honest truth is we haven't really built anything where we can take advantage of something like this. And, you know, AI requires a lot of training, data, and to try and do that now, we'd be pulling some of the frontline responders off. But does that mean we can't do anything, or do we at least have an opportunity in the future to do something so we don't have a pandemic, or at least maybe not even an epidemic? And the answer is very much yes, we actually can. And the challenge I've always seen with AI is that we don't realize it's quite kind of a yin and a yang type of model, right? AI tends to work best when we have the subject matter experts, the domain experts working in partnership with the technical experts for us. Right? And it's the meshing between the two that really create that opportunity. And it also means that we have to have domain experts like medical professionals that understand a little bit about like AI, and vice versa. We have some technologies that understand a little bit about like healthcare. And, you know, obviously virus genomics would be awesome, but I haven't met too many people that are actually like that. But when we come through this confluence, we actually have an amazing opportunity. And to get in the right mindset, I always talk about my magic formula, that it's not just problem solution, it's really mindset, problem defined, domain expertise combining together to create our opportunities. From the opportunities, we marry that with technical expertise and our infrastructure to actually create our solution. So what does this really mean? The mindset is really more about like entrepreneurial type of thinking. Let's think away different ways we can do something, kind of green screen, step away from thinking about why won't things work and focus on how we can actually make something work. And then the problem. So what are the real problems behind, what are the challenges, the real root causes? Bring in the right domain expertise, things we might know about, for example, medicine, regulation, adoption challenges. And this really gives us the opportunity or the art of the possible. Once we have our opportunity, we marry that with our technical expertise, right? What is actually feasible? Think about what are the capabilities and things we can really do with AI and the tools of implementation around it. Plus, do we have the right infrastructure, right? The support structure, system requirements. Do we need, like, for example, a ton of big data? Do we need to know things about virus genomics? Do we have a 5G connection? Do we need quantum computers? Combine all these together for our solution, which is the possible. Now, we think about something like, right mindset, generative design. Now, we're actually already using AI and generative design in manufacturing. And the whole premise around generative design is rather than just tell like the machine or even a person, this is exactly what I want, right? Let's say I'm going to build a plane, and say like, okay, it's going to have this fuselage, it's got to have these types of wings, it's going to have this type of engine. We actually tell the basic parameters of what a plane is and some of the science around it. So, talk about things like lift and thrust and all that and say, look, I need a new type of plane can you design one for me? And my requirements for the plane are maybe it has to hold 200 passengers. Maybe it has to have a range of 14,000 miles. Maybe it has to have this level of fuel efficiency. And what actually happens is that the AI then actually generates millions upon millions of different design options. And then whittles it down based on what it knows to 5 or 7 really good designs to share with people. But here's the interesting thing. As it actually goes through this process, right, as the machine is developing all these designs, it's actually trying to think of new ways of doing some of these things. And we've actually seen the AI come back and come up with new type of material fabrications, things that people haven't actually thought of before, but meet the safety and system requirements of an airplane. Now, imagine that this kind of power, right, generating millions of designs, getting the top to 5 to 7 choices out there for people to review and consider. What if we did that for viruses like COVID-19? Is it possible? Absolutely. Obviously, we've got to teach the AI about how to actually do this. But imagine for a second that with COVID-19, we had an AI system that had the ability to do generative design. So to actually study the virus genomics and understand how the virus actually might mutate. Powerful stuff, right? If we had that information, we know that we could then break that down to help us find a vaccine. We know how to try and take virus genomics, look for the different things, and actually create that vaccine. Now we can combine AI and generative design to figure out, the genomics and possible mutations, and then have another AI tool that can actually help us actually manufacture that vaccine based on all this information. I'd like to take this step even further for a second. Imagine that there's a potential virus out there we're not aware of. Imagine that we have an AI system out there crunching this information constantly based on other factors, environment, other animal disease breakouts, maybe even plant. Whole host of data out there that we're taking, so that's actually predicting and modeling and generating millions upon millions of potential epidemic scenarios. It's not even pandemic, but epidemic scenarios. We, in theory, could actually predict the next big virus outbreak, possible mutations, and have a vaccine ready before it actually happens. Powerful stuff, right? And I think that's one of the things that we should be actually taking a look at. We have a real golden opportunity ahead of us to tackle some of the biggest challenges for a pandemic or even epidemic world. And this actually goes even beyond just the virus itself, right? Imagine preventing illnesses and diseases, right? Or the social impacts that we're seeing. Unfortunately, right now, COVID-19 is shining that light on all the weak spots that we have in everything that we do. Right? We know that, for example, mental health is also a huge issue, and mental health actually plays a role in our physical health. Right now, a lot of people are under a lot more stress, anxiety and depression are on the rise. Unfortunately, so is addiction, so is domestic violence and child abuse, which have long-term impacts, not just on that person's health, but potentially other people's as well. We've seen that our food supply chains have been stretched to the limits, right? In terms of production and waste and trying to get things to the right people. Unfortunately, like farmers can't sell directly to people. But again, even safety, we're worried about things around finance, like jobs, bank stability, just economics in general. Imagine again that we had an AI with generative design that could actually model a lot of these things, do the prediction and say, like, what, even based on that, I could come up with, millions of possible diseases that might come out there. How do we help figure out which are the right ones to focus on? Take a look at these different areas around like mental health, food, and finance. So look at the whole epidemic or pandemic as an ecosystem using AI and generative design. It's a real golden opportunity, I think, for us to really be trying to changing the world. And I think that each of us have an opportunity to do something here and figure out a solution for all of us, help the world community. So my question to you is, how might you use AI in generative design? Right, we're going to go out into breakouts. I want you to try and think of these challenges. And if you have any other questions or you want to reach to me in the future, here's my contact information. But right now, we're going to head out to our breakout rooms. Thanks.
So the prompt is, how might you use AI in generative design? And so there you go. And here we go. All right, Neil, how was that? You're mute.
That's interesting. Video stayed on, but not the mic. No, that was a great breakout session. Good discussion.
Awesome. Great. We got Brian in here still, Steven, Jeff, Rick, Alex, Rhonda. So Carl.
Good to see you.
Yeah,
Carl.
good to see you all. I guess right now open discussion. So if you guys have any questions or like to talk, just feel free to just go for it.
Well, I have a question for Neil. First, I have to reveal that I follow Neil everywhere, even when he goes overseas. So Neil, can you get a little bit more granular on how these generative designs are going to work with vaccines or therapeutic drugs, other than just whittling down the universe of potential candidates?
So I won't pretend to be a medical researcher or anything like that, but there's actually parts of the virus. There's like the spike protein, and there's a snippet of I can't remember if it's the DNA or RNA, they call it H something, that if we understand what those pieces are, we can actually essentially engineer the virus to understand what it will be susceptible to. And so if we actually knew those things, we could help then either create a weaker strand of the virus that then our own immune system could easily attack and develop its own antibodies, or actually try to reverse engineer human antibodies against that genomic data so we get inoculated against it.
Right. And is it Moderna who has a vaccine that just finished phase 2 trials and going into phase 3? And I think it has, it's using genomic data to design the vaccine. And I think that's kind of a new focus for the vaccine developers.
So Moderna, there's another company in Europe, I forgot the name, are doing the same thing. Moderna is actually entering phase 2 trials.
Oh, I thought it had done a combo phase 1, phase 2.
No, not quite. What the CDC and FDA have approved is if a potential vaccine shows promise in phase 1, they'll let them start phase 2, phase 3 concurrently.
Oh, so I see. Okay.
Yeah, it's just for people who are not familiar with there's actually 4 phases for human trials, and it normally takes about 18 months, best case scenario. And to try and accelerate the process, they're allowing some overlap between the phases, as well as if you get into phase 2, you can start phase 3 at the same time, which also allows starting the production of a potential vaccine, because production ramp up takes quite a while. So rather than us have to potentially wait 18 plus months for a vaccine, they believe this will shorten the life cycle down to about maybe 12 to 15 months.
Right. And so with these generative design issues that you're talking about work for therapeutic drugs as well as vaccines. So I want to cure somebody who has COVID-19, not just prevent them from getting it.
So the simple answer is yes. I would hesitate to use the word cure because we technically don't cure things, we inoculate. So even things like polio and all that, we actually give people inoculation so that our body generates the antibodies so that we can't contract it again, or can't contract it, I should say. I just make that difference because I hear a lot of people saying like, well, I forget the vaccine, let's just get a cure. There's nothing really like that unless we start having nanobots in our bodies that prevent some of these diseases. I'm not sure we're going to be able to cure like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are some cures, but you're right, they're very rare and then very expensive. Let's see, who's making the remdesivir? They also have a hepatitis C drug, which is actually a cure, but those are pretty rare. Yeah.
Well, good questions, Carl. Do you, anybody else have any questions?
What do you recommend for research? Where can I go read some more?
I mean, there's a lot of like papers, and there's some videos out there, but like I was mentioning in the breakout session, I'll share with everybody. General Electric and there's another company, and I'm totally blanking on it, are actually doing a lot with generative design and AI right now. And they have actually a host of examples and case studies on their work, as well as some videos, and it's definitely worth checking out. And the International Space Station is actually looking to do this as well. They actually, I think it was about 2 years ago, a bunch of 3D printers were actually put onto the International Space Station so that they could try and fabricate some replacement parts on their own. And they're realizing now that if they can do the AI generative design, maybe they don't have to necessarily wait to or stockpile a bunch of materials, that the AI can actually help them figure out how to make replacement parts or even some new parts or new things with the materials they actually have on hand. So that I think is actually a fascinating thing for a variety of reasons, because if this works well, I know that NASA and the European Space Agency think this will be an accelerator to interplanetary, maybe interstellar travel, and that we don't necessarily have to carry a bunch of stuff with us, including potentially water. We might actually be able to fabricate our own water using organics and AI and 3D printing.
I have a quick comment that when this topic came up, the first thing I thought of was the evolved antenna, which I just put into the Slack. And that's one of the sort of the cooler things I've seen in sort of manufacturing intersecting with AI. It doesn't seem to be quite the topic that you're talking about, but I'm a big fan of genetic algorithms. I've been using them since the 90s. And this particular antenna, for those of you who don't know, was an attempt to optimize reception of radio signals on a satellite. And instead of using a straight antenna, which is kind of inefficient, this research was done, and they used a technique called genetic algorithms, where they try basically lots and lots of permutations, and they come up with the optimal configuration. And if you look at it on Wikipedia, it's this bizarre looking thing, kind of looks like a paper clip that's been mangled in a paper shredder, that turns out to be extremely efficient. And I love this story because it's just such a weird one. You come up with this ugly little thing. But the technique is pretty fascinating. I've used a lot of GA, and they always come up with something weird and like you can't use twice, but that's kind of very, poetic in terms of life. Life comes up with something weird that you can't use on another planet, for instance.
Thanks for sharing, Brian. I'm not too familiar. I have to check that out. That sounds interesting. But that's the thing. We know there's so many scenarios, and our human brains can't run through all of them or conceive of all of them. This is why the power of AI generative design can be really tapped into, not just figure some of these things out, but actually explore, simulate faster and cheaper. So hopefully we'll innovate faster.
You briefly mentioned nanobots. How far are we from nanobots? Nanobot building.
That's a great question, Jeff. I don't know. We know that we have the nanobot technology, and it's a question: can we infuse some AI into them? It depends, one, on how complex the tasks that we want them to do, and second is how much variability is actually in there. Because the more variability, the more the AI needs to be trained, the more data that we need. Very simply, I think it's Under Armour that has the new type of clothing where they have a fabric and they're using It's sort of like a nanobot, I guess I'll call it, but it detects and will identify things that are actually dirt particles and actually eat the dirt particle to keep your clothing clean. So will we have self-aware nanobots patrolling our bodies? Maybe one day. I think change happens faster than we realize. I know my first gut would be like 15, 20 years, but given that happens faster, it might be 8.
I'm not sure, I'm sorry, chiming in again here, but there's this book, one of Neil Stephenson's sort of more mediocre novels called Seven Eves, where he has a really interesting take on nanobots, where they're in a craft, you know, like a extraorbital craft, and the nanobots live on the outside of the ship in order to repair it, but all of their information and their decision making comes from within the craft. So, you know, to Neil's point, like part of the hard part is getting all that decision down to a small enough chip, right? Something really, really tiny, providing enough data, enough compute power to make decisions. And so how he envisioned it was that they wouldn't really, they would just get tasks the same way ants do, but then sort of reprogram their fundamental thinking from an external source. So like an ant is a pretty simple beast, but it can do some complex things in aggregate. If you can just give it the right rules to follow, you know, John Conway did a lot of this stuff with artificial life. If you can give it the right rules to follow, it will create this cool emergent behavior. And so he was, Stephenson envisioned that happening from an external source, and would reprogram all the bots at once. You give them the right instruction set and sort of motivations, and they all figure out how to accomplish the task as a unit. I just love that take. I mean, I would like to see the future go that way because I thought it was neat. But, you know, it may not be the best way to do it.
Well, I think nanobots really do have a future in terms of therapeutic drugs, because one of the big issues and the difference between testing a drug in vitro and testing it in vivo is getting the particular molecules to the right organs of the body, something that's known as pharmacokinetics. And so a lot of drugs may fail in phase 2 or phase 3 because they're just going to the wrong places in the body. They're otherwise fine, but they're not helping. And if you can put them on the back of a nanobot, so the nanobot is the driver and has the instructions to get it to the lungs or to the heart, then I think we would have a much greater supply or universe of potential drugs. And I think that's all, that kind of investigation is already underway.
This is the exciting thing about the future, because it sounds like it's going to be so awesome. This is also the drawback, because I'm like, well, I live long enough to see it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. We just have to live long enough. Well, what is it? Kurzweil says we have to live to 2045 so we can upload our brains to hard drives. Yeah, absolutely. But I think medicine is an area where AI is just taking off like mad. And we've already seen a lot of applications, whether it's reading x-rays or performing surgery. It's just absolutely incredible.
There's a lot of need in healthcare, right? Especially right now during COVID-19. And I think that's why there's a lot of focus, and we all have, harbor some level of desire to be immortal. And right. So that's definitely a primal need I think we're trying to fulfill. But as we were chatting actually in the breakout room that I was in, is that we don't have to think about AI generative design just in terms of like medicine and epidemics or pandemics. There's a lot of other use, even just beyond trying to manufacture a product or an airplane. We've actually seen generative design in like food. And, it actually dawned on me as we're chatting that there's a guy named Neo that's kind of doing that for dance. Right, he has taught an AI that can do all these funky dance moves, could actually potentially design new dance moves for humans. So you think of anything that requires some level of design, even like educational curriculum, right? There's an opportunity to apply this combination of technology to hopefully accelerate our abilities to innovate, come up with something new. Even if it's just the fabrication of new, more sustainable, eco-friendly like building materials.
I think you're right. In the creative arts, it's going to be absolutely awesome. Did you go to that concert that the UN put on in Geneva last May?
I did.
That AI concert, it was unbelievable.
It was mind blowing. For those of you wondering what we're talking about, for the UN AI for Good, we set up this AI and art exhibit and this cultural experience. And so what happened was we actually had LJ Rich, who's a very famous DJ out of the UK, do something and show what she was doing with AI and voice. And then, or sorry, not AI and music, like, and coming up with new kinds of beats and tones and ways to evoke emotion. And then Reaps One, who's a very famous vocal artist, helped develop an AI that disrupts the human voice. And then there was Mio and his AI dancer, and they all three came together at the end to do a joint performance. So you had music by a human and a machine. You had the vocals by a human and a machine. You had the dance with a human and a machine dancer, and it was mind blowing. That's just a way to put it.
Yeah, it was mind blowing.
Yeah, that's where we met, Neil, right?
Yeah, I think it was the first time we met in person. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, the Copyright Office has recently said that none of that is copyrightable. You have to have a human creator.
Depends on which country you're in, right? In Europe, the EU actually recognize inventions by a machine and will credit the AI as the inventor. The US, they won't do that.
Right.
Well, not yet, right?
It's interesting because the world's going to have to come together and come up with one agreeable standard on that. You can't have it both ways. That's just, I think, long term not going to be feasible. So it becomes an interesting debate.
And it's same in the patent space, same issues.
I guess you get a couple of different options this way for now. One of them is going to work. One of them is going to work so much obviously better, right?
Well, let's go one way or the other, right?
Yeah, the divergence of the copyright regimes that Neil, you're speaking to is very problematic because, you know, if you have a copyright in one country, you automatically have a copyright in every other country. And so I hadn't thought about this, but yeah, the EU or the UK recognizes works by creative works by computer. Then what happens if there's an infringement in the US? These are, well, you know, these are all full employment acts for lawyers, to tell you the truth.
But I think it leads to a larger question, right? The legalities aside, we're always talking about, could a machine create? Could it create like art, for example? Right? What's really the limits here? And we're realizing that, look, there's a lot of things people do better than machines. Don't get me wrong on that front. But the new capabilities we're getting through AI, and you know, the ability to extend some of this design creativity, for lack of a better word, has been essentially surprising to a lot of people. You know, you were talking about the ability for, you know, AI, like something like a Chef Watson, to design original food recipes with ingredient combinations that we never thought of before, has been mind-blowing, right? Who would have thought that a machine could essentially use generative design and come up with new recipes, ingredient combinations, flavors, aromas we haven't conceived in over 50,000 years of human history. All right, that's the potential we have at our fingertips. These are, you know, the opportunities for all of us could be tremendous, for good, for commercial, for social enterprise. But I think getting the awareness and starting to try something is the first step, which is why I think, you know, the AI in LA, what they're doing, especially with this series, is so impactful and so powerful.
Right. Yeah, my background is in using genetic algorithms for architectural design. And I found that it's particularly useful for, generating something that's ultra specific to your set of conditions. But you definitely do need to be in constant contact with an experienced architect as you're setting those objectives in order for it to run properly.
Well, that's definitely good to know. Thank you. And that, you know, always goes to the point I'm trying to make with people, in that if you're waiting for the really smart technologists to tell you how to do some of these things, they probably don't fully know. I haven't met many technologists, or how smart they are, really understand the ins and outs of medicine or healthcare or law or even accounting. It's the confluence between the two, the subject matter experts, the domain expert, and the technologist, that's really gonna unlock the potential that we have here.
Exactly.
And that's what you're trying to do down at UC Irvine, right?
That is what I'm trying to do at UCI, and we're using law actually as a test bed for that. And it's been interesting because the most successful, I mean, the most successful like AI solutions I've seen, the most successful AI startups that I've seen have actually been started by non-technical people, that they're actually folks that really understand their space. Like there's a startup in LA called Legalmation, started by 3 lawyers, right? No technical knowledge. And they've essentially crafted an AI associate lawyer that can do some work around complaint and generate like interrogatories, deposition questions and things like that, that would take you know, a human 8 to 12 hours to do, but their AI takes 2 minutes. And everyone's like, how come no one thought of this before? Well, the only way you would have known this was a pain point and a bit of grunt work was if you were actually a lawyer. And that's why the subject matter expertise and knowing the space is so critical.
James Lee is working with our a legal aid clinic at Loyola, and he's having students develop apps.
That's awesome. That's awesome. James Lee is the CEO of Legalmation, for those who don't know. Yeah.
Really cool. Unless there's any burning desires at the end here. It's been amazing. Thank you so much, Neil Sahota, for spending your time today. Thank you everyone else that joined us. We will be uploading this to YouTube. Again, next week, we'll be having another episode of The New Normal. This time we'll be having Morgan R. Frank from MIT. He'll be speaking on the universal resilience patterns in labor markets. And so it should be a pretty interesting topic given the times. Again, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you very soon, and stay safe out there and be well.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Todd.
Thank you.
You guys. Till next time. Bye.